Everyone, and welcome to tonight's very timely conversation entitled Rethinking Regeneration. My name is LUEBKEMAN, and I have the pleasure and the privilege of being the leader of the Strategic Foresight Hub at the Office of the President in ETH Zurich. And most importantly for tonight, I get to be your host for the conversation. We are again here in this splendid location of the Museum for Naturkunde in Berlin. The building opened in 1889, a very impressive year for architecture all over the world. It was built on a site of ironworks, is why the beautiful stairways are such beautiful Gusseisen, they're cast iron. It was bombed during World War II, and as you can see today, it is a fabulous manifestation of regeneration. It is a living place, a place where life has been brought in again. The Berlin Science Week is a forum for scientists and science-driven organizations to engage with the public, share insights on current topics, discuss grand challenges, and to envision the future together. We, the ETH Zurich, are very proud to have been a part of the Berlin Science Week since its inaugural edition in 2017. It's hard to believe it's gone by so quickly, actually. And the door is open and I can hear it. That's good. Our dialogue this evening is part of ETH Zurich's Rethinking Living campaign. Many of us have the feeling that we're confronting massive changes to just about every aspect of our lives. Climate change, biodiversity loss, democracy being disputed, global pandemics, wars, and technological disruptions present clear and present danger for all of us. But more importantly, they also present us an opportunity to focus on finding solutions to these grand challenges, to embrace much deeper meaning to our existence, perhaps, and to rediscover overlooked aspects of our lives. Rethinking Living invites us to touch the core meaning of our humanity, our role in the systems of the world around us, and to foster, hopefully, a more clear and deeper sense of purpose. So let's get started. We have three amazing guests with us tonight, and it is truly an honor to be up here with them. All very passionate and have a very clear purpose to what they're doing and with their lives, all of them. First, we have next to me Ralf Müller. He's a professor at ETH Zurich and a global leader in biomechanics. He has pioneered scientific advancements in bioimaging and mechanobiology. Did I get that right?
Yeah.
All right.
Great.
Good. And significantly impacting tissue regeneration research and co-founding enterprises focused on innovative medical technologies. So let's welcome Ralf. Let's give him a hand. There we go.
Thank you.
All right. Next, we have next to him Josephine GRAF. Josephine is the co-CEO and one of our 4 female co-founders of our reefs. Reefs. I'm not quite sure how we say it. You're going to correct me later. A Swiss startup that focuses on coral reef regeneration. With her background in business and political science, she is passionate about advancing climate action and sustainable development. Welcome, Josephine.
Thank you.
And finally, the man I would call our local hero here at PIC, an internationally recognized scientist, Swedish scientist, on global sustainability issues and director of the Potsdam Institute for Climate Impact Research, or PIC, where he, for example, in his career in the past 20 years has led many developments, especially around the planetary boundary framework and the new planetary boundary framework, which you're going to tell us a little bit more about. An advocate, an extremely strong advocate for sustainable solutions in the current era of rapid global change. Welcome, Johan. So our time together with here present today and also online is going to be about 75 minutes. Each of our panelists are going to start off by a short introduction to their work. Can't wait to see it. And then we're going to have a discussion here up on the desk. And then you, our audience, are going to be asked are given the opportunity or asked to ask questions of these three individuals. And I can tell you it's not often that we'd have these three to ask questions of in such an easy manner. And so periodically I'll ask you, do you have a question? And if you do have a question, just raise your hand, I'm going to count. One or two isn't going to do it. You have to have 3 or 4, including online. So we have 3 or 4 or 5, then we're going to start asking questions. So, Johan, we're going to start with you, if we can. And Planetary Boundary Framework. There's one, and now there's a new one.
Yep, there's an update.
Yeah.
Great. No, good evening, everyone. And before coming to the assessment, which I have here on the wall, I think it's very special to discuss regeneration at the Naturkunde Museum here in Berlin, because we know now scientifically that our home, planet Earth, can only exist in 3 stable equilibrium states that all are self-regulated through regenerative capacities. And one extreme is the snowball Earth. Let's simply exclude that one. The last time we had a snowball Earth was over 100 million years ago. The second state is this extraordinary limit cycle that we've had over the past 1 million years, when we have 100,000 years of ice age, separated by short periods of warm interglacials, the equilibrium states, which the last one, the Holocene, which is the one that has enabled civilizations to develop as we know them, the very reference point for a desired planet. And then we had a third state. And this third state is the one that is at risk of today becoming a self-propelling journey into the future. And that is the hothouse Earth state. And the last time we had a hothouse Earth state is roughly 50 million years ago, when the guys downstairs roamed on planet Earth. This was the dinosaurs. This was the tropical planet. This is a planet that moves away towards a point where we lose all the ice age, all the ice sheets on planet Earth, and we have a warm planet which is 4 or 5 degrees warmer than today. Why does it end up in that state? Well, it's not because of just solar radiative forcing, it's regenerative capacities. It's feedback dynamics that self-propels itself into this warm state. The biggest fear we have today is that we will shift the planet due to our human-induced unsustainable undermining of regenerative capacity from the Holocene towards a trajectory that would drift away unstoppably towards a hothouse Earth state. I would argue that this is like the #1 biggest challenge we have as humanity. That's why we developed the Planetary Boundary Framework. Because what this does is to ask 2 questions. One scientific question is, what are the big biophysical systems that regulates the regenerative capacity of the planet? And once we have identified those processes, and we've identified 9, we ask ourselves the question, can we quantify safe boundaries that gives us a safe operating space, seen here in green, that gives us a high likelihood of keeping the planet in a desired equilibrium state which has enabled human development as we know it, the Holocene state. Push ourselves outside of these safe boundaries, and we have a high likelihood of triggering unregenerative, actually self-amplifying feedbacks that can push the planet in a direction where we lose life support systems and ultimately have existential, potentially completely unmanageable disaster future for humanity. Now, this was first published in 2009 as a challenge for the scientific community. It came about as a result of 30 years of extraordinary scientific advancements on resilience science, tipping point science, and the unequivocal evidence that we've entered a whole new geological epoch, the Anthropocene, meaning that the pressures on planet Earth has made us humans now the dominating force of change on planet Earth. So there was a lot of evidence into this. We've identified the 9 boundaries, and you have the 9 here. And this is today, 15 years later, confirmed through over 2,000 peer-reviewed scientific papers that have come out and critically assessed the framework, that if we can get it right on these 9, I would today argue that we have very strong scientific support, that then we have a good chance of having manageable living conditions on Earth for all generations into the future. But the big breakthrough is that we've been able to quantify, for the first time, safe boundaries for all the 9 boundaries. In 2015, in the last update, we could only do 6. Now what you see here is for the first time all the 9. And this is published in Science Advances for just 2 months ago. The dramatic message to humanity, which is shown on this screen, is that 6 of the 9 boundaries are outside of the safe space. It's not only climate, it's also what I call the biosphere boundaries of biodiversity loss. You see that in the upper left-hand corner there. Existential risks facing the fact that we're in the 6th mass extinction of species and that we're losing functional diversity like carbon sequestration capacity, moisture feedback, all forms of ecosystem provision of services to humanity. Land system change, overuse of fresh water, and overloading of reactive nitrogen and phosphorus, particularly through overuse of fertilizers. This is very, very worrying, because what this means that even if you focus only on trying to solve the climate crisis, we are in trouble, because by transgressing, by breaching the biosphere boundaries, planet Earth is losing its regenerative capacity. So we are in the worst of situations. We have this massive human-caused energy imbalance by burning fossil fuels. And when you pose that tremendous stress on a system, of course you want to have a strong system. But unfortunately, we are, by breaching all the nature boundaries, losing the capacity, the resilience of the system to buffer that stress caused by climate. So we have a weak planet when we need a stronger planet more than ever. That's not a good combination. But that's unfortunately where we are today. That's why we talk today of a planetary emergency, because we're losing regenerative capacity on planet Earth. We have to very, very quickly transform ourselves back into this safe space. And let me just close, Chris, by saying that we're very close to the COP28 climate negotiations in Dubai. We will come to Dubai saying this is the last chance we have of now starting to seriously bend the curve of emissions to start phasing out coal, oil, and gas. We need to really embark on the mitigation pathway. But let me just reinforce with you that we have now a number of scientific papers that shows that even that will not take us to a manageable 1.5 degrees Celsius limit, which is what science tells us is the limit that will keep us away from danger. And the danger is shown on the mapping of tipping points. So we have this assessment today of the 16 big tipping point systems that not only regulates the stability of the climate system, but they have multiple stable states. Push them too far, and they will shift from one state, the state we need, to another state where they will self-amplify warming. More methane from thawing permafrost, losing all the coral reef systems that we'll hear much more about right now. The big biomes like this rainforest systems that are carbon sinks. Now, what you see here is for the first time in the dark colors, the estimate of at what temperatures are we at risk of crossing tipping points where these systems will very likely tip over from the state protecting us to states where they amplify warming. The dark red ones are those that are likely to cross the tipping points already at 1.5 degrees Celsius. And just look at the map. The Greenland ice sheet, the West Antarctic ice sheet, all the tropical coral reef systems, and the loss of the Barents Sea ice. So this is a scientific warning that the boundaries are real and that we have to truly recognize the need for the regenerative capacity of the entire planet to have any chance, even if we only focus in on climate. And that is why this whole discussion is so central. And looking at the dinosaurs and what happened to that civilization on planet Earth, we don't want that to be the end for our human civilization on Earth. And for that, we need to truly invest in our regenerative capacity across all scales. And we'll hear much more of that here tonight.
That's great,
Back
Johan.
to you, Chris.
Thank you. Thank you very much for the very sobering introduction. And it's very important for us to remember that dinosaurs were on our planet for quite a long time. I think it was about 165 million years, if I'm...
Yeah, and we've just been around for 250,000 years.
Exactly. So we need to do some schooling here. And I think it sounds like what you're indicating is we need some lessons, and that's what we're learning. And let's move over to the reefs. So he mentioned one of the systems is the low latitude coral reefs, and Josephine, this is your passion.
Sure.
So tell us about what you're doing.
I'm part of Reefs. We are an ETH spin-off from based in ZÜRICH, and we are rebuilding coral reefs with 3D printed modular clay modules. And this is one of them. So you can think a bit like, it's like Lego. You can staple them underwater and create these underwater reefs. And And actually, this is our pilot reef, which we built 2 years ago in the Caribbean, which is now, this photo was taken 2 years ago, no, 1 year ago, after 1 year monitoring, and you can see how the corals are growing and baby corals are settling. So our reef is specifically designed to attract baby corals to settle at the surface and to grow. And so to go back to the regenerative capacity, also coral reefs have, we think, or we let nature take back. So we bring these structures underwater, but then it's nature to grow here. And from genetic diversity, these baby corals settle here and grow. And we can also see that after 8 months, we saw the first baby corals on our reef. And this is despite, in the Caribbean also, there are many stressors, like local factors, such as overfishing, pollution. There's a big problem with algae growing. But also, of course, climate change and overheating and coral bleaching. I don't know if you know that corals become white if it's too hot. And this is currently happening actually in the Caribbean. So in Florida has lost more than approximately 90% of their corals just now. And now we see the heat wave also coming to our pilot reef on the island of San Andres in Colombia. And so we can see firsthand what climate change does also to corals and reefs. But still we see baby coral settling despite these stresses. And I think that also shows us, and I have actually another photo of a baby coral. So we monitor them every half year, and we still see these baby corals settling. So now we have nearly on every module of our reef, we have one baby coral, and this is 2 to 3 times higher than on the natural reefs. So we're monitoring this closely, and yeah.
That's really fantastic.
RPG.
So, and your goal with this is to bring this to not just the Caribbean, but to other parts of the world as well. Is there a specific latitude that works with your system better than others, or is it
the tropics work good, where coral reefs exist? Yes, exactly. And we started with the Caribbean because we got the permit there as well. So we always need permits. We need negotiations with governments to install these. So it was more practical point of view to go there. But now we're starting in the Philippines to do a larger regeneration project next year.
But let me ask, why did you start this? What are you a diver, or do you like little reefs, or why was this? Where did this come from?
I have to say it was not my idea. 2 co-founders, okay. So we have 4 co-founders, as you said. We are all women. We are all very passionate about climate action and our oceans. And Ulrike and Marie, who are not here today, they met at ETH. And Ulrike is a marine biologist and Marie an artist, and they both worked on underwater structures. Or Marie created art, which she did also underwater to kind of raise awareness about the topic of coral reefs. And Ulrike did her PhD on surface structures that can attract corals, and they met at ETH, and I think that's also an interesting part of reefs, that we kind of combine arts, so we still see that arts is a useful mean for us to kind of educate, especially in Switzerland and Germany, where reefs are not so close, and also to have
unless you fly to them. You can fly to them, and then
you can fly to them, yeah.
Shouldn't fly to them.
Or you can
shouldn't fly too much, yeah.
I know exactly. I was being a bit facetious with that one.
Yeah.
That was.
But I think the combination of science and art also sets us apart from other solutions.
But you mentioned that. Thank you for that. It's really fantastic. And you mentioned this sort of trying to regrow. And this is where you're looking at helping corals recolonize and regrow, repopulate, so they can continue to sequester carbon is one of the things that they can do, right?
Yeah.
And Ralph, you're all about regrowing.
Can I get that?
Right? We need to, if you can pass down the thing, this is what you have made your name in, and regrowing.
Well, yeah, and regeneration is, in a biological and medical sense, and of course the structures that we have are much smaller. And I just want to show, for example, if you take a bone and you do an osteotomy, so taking a piece out of the bone, you can see how the bone regrows, right, in between those 2 parts. This is in a living system. But there's constraints sometimes in how this can regrow. So we have also lose some of the regenerative capacities if we do that while aging, for example. And one of the ways that we can overcome that is we use loading, for example. Right. So when you look at the left side, you can see that in the first few weeks we have the same behavior between the two systems, but then we start putting extra mechanical forces, vibrational forces on the left system, and then you can see how this regenerates much better. So for me, it's an important part. I'm an engineer by training, and of course we can learn from nature, right? Nature does know how to regenerate, but if you have a certain age, somehow then we fail to do that, for example, or if certain disease, you might fail to do that. And how can we engineer those systems that we can overcome some of these hurdles? And I find it fascinating in how to look at these capacities that you have in such, let's say small systems on a cellular scale, resolutions that you're talking here is a few hundred microns or something like that. To look also at the world, right? So we heard about what are the driving factors and how can we maybe stop that, but how can we maybe engineer some of these things to help nature, help us to overcome some of these problems. And I think this is where we can learn from medicine, and we have a term that has been around for a long time, regenerative medicine, and where we help basically the systems with cell engineering or outside stimulus, and to make a better system in the end. So I think this is, maybe we can do that. And one reason why I think you brought me here is wonderful in these bones. I mean, they first of all, they're very dynamic in how they remodel over time. And second is that they do that scarless, right? So you take a piece out, and that's very important, and I'll come back to that later. When you do regeneration, you cannot have regeneration without taking something away. You cannot regenerate something that is in place. It's impossible. You need to take something away first, and then you can regenerate, get new functions in there, and in the end, bone does it scarless. There is not a scar that you can see. We know all skin. We have maybe our little scars every now and then somewhere, right, that stay for a lifetime. Bone doesn't do that. Bone heals scarless. And I think that's something we could find out how this is done. And so we can use this also for other applications. And I think that's something to study. And these interdisciplinary parts are then very important to work together.
That's really fascinating. So when you say scarless, I'm thinking our systems, when you're looking with your reefs, they're scarred, or the losses we've seen. I mean, what kind of a thought does that trigger in the two of you and one of you? Who wants to? Johan, when you hear this, we have to have loss in order to have regeneration. What do you think?
Yeah, well, I mean, one thing it reminds us, which I think is really one of the few lights in the tunnel we have, is that nature has this remarkable capacity to bounce back. And even under tremendous pressures, like what the coral reefs are suffering on, across the entire planet. But look at any species, any fish species, plants, ecosystems, they have this remarkable capacity as long as you don't push them really too far, so the scar cannot go too deep. They have a possibility, once you release the pressure, to come back in a quite remarkable way. So I think that's proof of the life force or regenerative capacity. So I think it's not. We don't have evidence that scars would so to say be beneficial, but it just shows that we have a responsibility to reduce pressure once we've caused a scar.
It's interesting because I think of the system, which you've demonstrated the planetary boundaries, we're showing one where it's complete loss versus damage. And I'm just curious, when you in your research, or both of you, damage versus complete loss. You say you remove a piece of bone. What if you damage it? Does that?
It's similar in that sense, right? So if you destroy life in that part, so damage and it get necrotic or something like that, of course, it will never heal. You have to take it away. Think about a tumor as well, right? That destroys maybe bone. First, you have to take away the tumor. Well, then you end up with maybe a defect that is too big, right? And so this will never heal. Not heal with scar or no scar, will never heal. What you do, you put something inside. And I think the reef is exactly the same. There will be no reef if we don't put a printed structure there that allows for these to settle again. So basically, if it's necrotic, you have to take it out. It's like a cancer. And then you can put something in. Maybe you have to put something in. You cannot just wait for that to be, destroyed by nature. It will take way too long. So you have to go in there and do it, take it out and put something new. So
I think that's kind of an interesting comparison to maybe climate change and a tumor, in the sense that, as I said, I think we really believe in nature's capacity to regenerate, and that's why we also put the foundation in the water for corals then to settle and grow. But at the same time, as you said, if we don't do anything now, because the regenerative capacity is not there anymore, or is not functioning anymore because the climate change is accelerating so fast for corals and it's becoming too hot, we will lose coral reefs very soon, as was indicated. By 2050, it's very likely that we have lost more than 95% of our coral reefs if we stay at the current emission path. So it's true, you have to kind of proactively regenerate to kind of keep, we always say we buy corals a bit more time to boost their resilience. But of course, it's not the solution for climate change. It's maybe one of the solutions which you can combine.
Sure, it's a step, it's a little piece. I think it's quite intriguing. You said, so, I'm sorry, did you want to?
No.
I think it's really quite intriguing because you said, there's this I can't come back to this idea of loss, total loss, and you something has to put something back, right? And if we step over some of these boundaries, what does it mean to put something back? You found a helper for the reef systems, but when we're looking at some of these other systems which are in their red, do we know those pathways? Are those pathways clear of, say, the coral reef pieces, or are we still searching for that?
Yeah, I think that's a really important question, Chris, because I mean, now we've talked in quite positive, optimistic terms that even if you have quite deep scars in the biosphere, there's this remarkable resilience and capacity to regenerate. But we also know that if you push systems too far, it can be impossible to turn back. And particularly when it comes to living systems, if you push extinction of species, you cannot regenerate a lost species. It's gone forever. We are at risk, actually, of completely losing big coral reef. Marine systems are at risk of complete collapse. And then you won't be able to regenerate them. I mean, it's not at scale, at least. At least we don't have any proof of that. So we have to be, the good news is that we don't have evidence that we have yet crossed those absolute finite lines. Even if we're in the dark red of transgressing boundaries, it's a warning that the system is under so high stress that it's losing its capacity to regenerative or to step back.
Right.
But we have to turn back before we cross those really dark red lines when the system can no longer come back. And we have examples of dead zones in some of the ocean systems, desertification areas. I mean, we have mass loss of species in some ecosystems in the world. Just look at the IUCN Red List, for example. So we know that there are absolute lines in the sand as well.
Sure. Yeah. But this is interesting with your research. I'll come back to your office. The analogy is quite intriguing to me. I'm thinking from other biomechanics, there are other systems, because within your larger domain, there are other species who can regenerate. There's living tissue which can regenerate. Our liver can regenerate. I wish my brain could regenerate on Sunday morning, but that doesn't do that. But, but are there any other lessons, insights that you could share with us from what your studies and your colleagues with that specific theory?
Yeah, I mean, of course, so I'm talking about here a system that if you don't make a huge defect, let's say it's not a scar, it will heal scarless, but make a huge defect. If it's not huge, it just does it naturally. But what we want to learn from, for example, are experiments that people do with salamanders or newts, right? When you can basically cut off a limb and it's fully restored, right? I'm not saying that there's no pain in that. I'm just saying that this can happen. And this is not possible, let's say, in humans. And I think we should, I'm totally with you that we have to be careful not to go that route and not trust that we can regenerate that. But we should do more research, right, that looks at how can we help those systems to regenerate? Because we're just not having to always count only on nature, right? We infringed it on nature, maybe we can help nature as well to do better than it was designed for. And I think that's something that is at least of interest for me. And we are constantly studying those systems to find out on a molecular level, why is a newt able to do that and beautifully and we are not. And this is to do, of course, also with the environment that they are, right? So I think that's a very important part. So you have to give the boundary conditions such that the mechanics are correct, for example, and otherwise it cannot. So the physics around it, right, needs to be correct. The chemistry around it needs to be correct. And we can help sometimes those systems to actually do that, right? So that is an important thing. And I think another thing that is very important, I feel like it's, in humans or other species, animals, we have generational regeneration. Right, so that's also why you call it regeneration, because you have a generation of people, my generation, a lot of people I see here, different generation, and we rejuvenate through that, right? Nature, we haven't found that so much, right? So it looks like it's a long 200 million years or something like that, but could we also maybe help the system by faster regeneration, really a new generation of nature that will take over and be faster than the one and heal, in that sense, because we really bank on that. The young people, they are fitter, and it will go the same way. They will get older, and then there's no life anymore, but we regenerate, right? And so how does nature do that in a climate sense, maybe, or maybe somebody knows, but I don't know, right? Or corals as well, of course. I don't know what their lifetime is, and
Maybe just to say with corals, it's the same as with salamanders. If you cut them, they grow together again and regrow. So they're also very resilient. And they also existed since, I think, the dinosaur age. So they're much more resilient than humans, maybe. So let's see. But just maybe on this topic, because we also think, for example, technology could be a way, right, to kind of help nature to regenerate. But it's not the solution, right? What we see also, we use 3D printing technology to kind of as a means to create the shapes we want and to also create the surface structure, which is our hypothesis really works for baby corals to settle and grow. But of course, also for coral reefs, there are so many success factors also in our reefs if corals grow there, from local factors, as I mentioned, overfishing, to governments protecting the reefs, to climate change. And I think so it's not just technology, right, where we can innovate our way out of climate change or of the biodiversity loss, which is like the biggest topic for coral reefs, as 25% of marine animals depend on coral reefs, and it's one of the tipping points, and we don't know what happens really if coral reefs are lost, because it's a chain reaction. No one really knows, like if the whole marine ecosystem collapses.
It's one of those experiments we don't really want to try to...
Yeah, so it's kind of a balance, right? Technology or helping nature, but also really regarding nature as kind of a technology which has a capacity, which has greater capacity to regenerate than technologies we have at the moment.
Yeah.
I want just to follow up on Ralph's really important point on regenerations and thinking about generations. One of the things that I find, and I think we have to be a bit self-critical as scientists as well, that we've completely failed to communicate, which is that I would argue that it doesn't care so much if you are skeptic or not with regards to whether fossil fuel burning is causing warming. The key issue is to recognize that the pace of change right now on planet Earth is completely unprecedented. Irrespective of who's causing it, it's way, way beyond the regenerative capacity of all living species on planet Earth. So because if you look at the last 1 million years, we've passed through 8 long ice ages and short interglacials, and the temperatures during that period have been, the warmest below 2 degrees Celsius of warming, and the coldest -4 in a deep ice age. I call this the corridor of life. Below 2, the warmest, -4 is an ice age. you actually can take that back even 3 million years. So the whole Quaternary has never been outside of this very narrow range. When you look at the fastest pace of change, you roughly increase 1 temperature in 1,000 years. That's a good rule of thumb. You leave an ice age, it takes about 5,000 years from -4 to +2. It's like 1 degree per 1,000 years. That's what our evolution can cope with. Now, we've increased temperature on Earth with 1 degree in 100 years. So we're going 10 to actually 100 times faster than anything we know in the geological history of planet Earth. It's not surprising that species are stressed, and that we see more and more signs that we're kind of crossing the limits of adaptation. And I think this in itself, lends itself to just, well, a lot of humbleness in terms of what's happening on planet Earth. But I think that should be sufficient to act very, very resolutely on trying to, build a more resilient future. That, you just look at what's happening and it's kind of going so fast. And just look at 2023, all the numbers are completely off the charts.
Yeah.
If you look at social media and science exchange on LinkedIn, it's just extraordinary. Oceanographers are just, expressing themselves in ways that I've never experienced before. Yeah. Because surface temperatures are like not one standard deviation outside of what's being experienced in the 50 years. It's 2-3 times, and we cannot even explain it. What's happening? So this has to be recognized. The pace of change is extraordinary. It's kind of beyond the generative capacity over generations.
Yeah. I think that's a really important point to remind us as we do these actions and think about what we're doing, is that pace of change. There's the absolute reality that we need to focus on. And I think, because it's both a global and a local issue. And I'm going to be coming to you guys for some questions very soon. And you haven't a question yet? Or you're just going, no questions? Okay, cool, I'll keep going. So, this is both a global and a local issue, because your reefs are extremely local. I mean, you're putting your art down. Bone and my bone, this is about, in global issue. So, for you as individuals, how do you see this meandering between the global and the local, the mindsets that we need to be holding as we're rethinking this topic, constantly speeding up and changing? How do you negotiate this? Who wants to hit first?
I can start, maybe.
Sure.
Yeah, I think for us, maybe it's also important to say we always build our reefs with local partners.
Cool. Yeah.
So we always engage the local community because, of course, and these are local communities in the tropics and often also least developed countries or developing countries, so that not have the means to restore coral reefs, oftentimes. And I think this is really important to bring local communities also in, also to protect our reefs, to have sustainability of our projects over time, and to have the buy-in as well, to have also this, or to highlight the social impact, socio-economic impact of reefs as well, because it's not only biodiversity and nature, but it's also, if a reef is lost, it's also direct consequences for people who live there, but also, I mean, in broader sense, if they all are lost, also for us directly here.
Yeah.
And this is felt, for example, through coastal erosion as well, because they break waves very efficiently, but then also to loss of fisheries, loss of income from tourism, and so on. So I think this local perspective is very, very important for us, and then also to have the buy-in from governments. But you also have the global scale all the times with climate change and like these bigger issues which you have to address at the same time.
Great, thanks. Johan, you look like you were going to chime in.
Yeah, I may say something that may come across a bit as a surprise or not being so conventional in thinking, which is that, to be honest, Chris, I think your question is wrong. Okay. I don't think it really applies anymore. And what do I mean by that? I mean that, the planet is not a big thing anymore. It's a very, very small unit. And the reason for this is the world has become so big. So we today live in a very big world on a very small planet. And of course, the planet has always been small. I mean, the atmosphere is 20 kilometers. So all life is in this very, very limited film that on a bicycle, it takes you half an hour and you're kind of beyond it. But up until the mid-1950s, we were still a relatively small world on a big planet. There was redundant coral reefs and fish and ocean and atmosphere to pollute and trees to cut, and we could expand agriculture. We could exploit and have these linear production systems consuming and producing waste, and it didn't cause planetary damage. But since the 1990s, we can today say we filled up the whole system. It's completely saturated on every square meter is saturated. So today there is no such thing as a big planetary scale out there. Every community, every business, every city, every individual has to recognize that we are completely intertwined in this very fragile, small system, planet Earth. And I think that's one of the, and I only talk about scientific failures tonight, our inability to communicate. I think one additional failure is that we haven't made it clear that we have to become, every one of us, stewards of this little precious planet. So I think it's more the question of how do we integrate scales. And every planetary boundary actually translates to a budget. Just like we've understood that the climate boundary of the Paris Agreement translates to a carbon budget, which translates to a trajectory that every country, every business needs to follow. Well, I can tell you it's the same thing for fresh water, for nitrogen, for phosphorus, for land, for biodiversity. So it's not difficult to see the chain from that global level to the local level. And I think we need to simply reconfigure ourselves to recognize that if I'm in Germany and I want to have a good modern welfare state in Germany, I want to have good jobs and a good life for my kids, I better connect to the planet. I better be equally concerned about the Greenland ice sheet, the Amazon rainforest, and the coral reef systems, because they are completely determining the outcome also for Germany, because it's all interconnected. You cannot disconnect from an ecosystem on the other side of the planet anymore, because they're all kind of impacting each other. So I think today, it's just one scale. It's all together. It's us.
I want to go with that, Johan. I really do. And I think there's so many billions of people who have a hard time just even getting a handle on where they exist.
For sure.
Right. And trying to negotiate between what you've just described, which I also subscribe to, but the reality of so many people just scrabbling for that existence, and how to say to them, oh, you've got to worry about the whole world. And they're like, actually, I'm trying to get some fish to feed my family. And that's this interesting dilemma, I think, which we grapple with, It's just that. So I hear you, and...
No, I agree. And as we know, populism and nationalism and egoism and distrust is rather pushing us in the other direction,
at the moment,
towards more and more kind of shutting us in and building walls. I agree. Yeah. It's a challenge.
Very much so. Okay, I want to turn to the questions again. I saw there are a couple questions online, I understand. Anyone else in the room have one? We have one up front. Anyone else? Everyone, okay, good. Not just consumption. This is also interaction tonight. There you go. So, Alexandra, from tonight, from our online audience, let's hear. What do you have? Read it out to us.
The question is, what needs to be done to convince decision makers that the scientific framework conditions are in place, and it is time to adapt and implement the framework conditions to our legal, economic, and social systems? What would you say to that?
Johan?
Just start?
Yeah.
Well, I think
I'm not sure I can answer that.
I'm sure Ralph can answer that.
I think there are two stories, both equally important. And of course, by now you know my first story, which will be that we have to stay with the facts, and we have to communicate that we are approaching unmanageable risks, and that we may cross these very important boundaries beyond which there is no regenerative capacity, which would be very, very big risks. I think that's important, and I think we should continue to communicate that. But equally important is the story that we haven't talked so much about today, which is that we have so much evidence today that sustainability and resilience and regenerative pathways is actually the only pathway that can take us towards, the Sustainable Development Goals, or whatever you want to call a modern, healthy, competitive, attractive, secure, and basically welfare state world in the future. So the sustainable pathway, just 10 years ago, we could not say that. There was not enough scientific evidence to say that the sustainable path is the winning path. But today we can. Today we have the scalable solutions to show that renewable energy, healthy and sustainable food, all forms of circular processes for material flows can give better economies and better outcomes on security, health, and economies. I think that's what politicians need to understand, that the writing is on the wall on risk, but there's also a risk of losing the race if you want to be a modern state in the future, or modern communities, or wherever scale you are at. And I think that's a combination that, again, we need to come across even better than we are using today.
Great answer. I like we're approaching unmanageable risks. That will get a lot of attention. Yeah. So I think, you want to add anything, or should I get another question?
Maybe I can just add
Good.
on the limited context of coral reefs, as we are talking also to governments to get the permits to build these. It really depends also on the context. But now in the Philippines, for example, we saw great enthusiasm also for this kind of solution, and others as well. They're really now protecting their marine ecosystems and trying to, and also other countries like Belize, and we're talking to. So there is interest and enthusiasm to do something. Sometimes it's hard with financing and these kind of things and bureaucracies, but
there's a recognition now,
That's
where
a
maybe 10
recognition.
years ago they would have just looked at you and laughed.
yeah, and they also
Now-
do more marine protected areas, for example, and no-take areas, which is really important for coral reefs and other ecosystems. So this is a good development we
It's a good
see.
sign.
Yeah.
We call it a weak signal that these are starting to give us indicators of where things are heading, which is critical, actually. Ralph, you wanted to?
Yeah, I wanted to say something in that sense. We can also learn from other areas. I think one of the things that you see in the work that has been done, scientific work on climate sustainability, it's very observational, right? And we observe nature. And when you look at what she's doing, it's an intervention. And when we want to develop new medical technology, there needs to be a clinical trial. And I think the politicians need to think more along the lines in how we fund interventions as well, right, in climate, let's say, or something like that. Not just like stop things, or there needs to be interventions, and there needs to be an effect. And so I think coral reefs are great, right, because you make an intervention, and then they should come back, and you can think about what does it take to actually for them to come back. And maybe there's other examples where you could do on a larger scale in some of the other, sustainable goals that where can we think about interventions, and we could show that this works. Right, something like that, rather than just observational.
I like this. It's intriguing. The experiment of the clinical trial, the test. There are a few hands went up. We've got the microphone here, and when you do, if you wouldn't mind standing, just so that those online can also see you, and we can see you because we have light. So, put your hands up again. Who wants to ask? Come on. Okay, here. Let's start in the back right there. Right there. Just go ahead and stand up, and if you don't mind, that helps a lot. Thanks.
Hi, thank you for your for your talk. I was wondering, you were talking about interventions. Do you also mean like climate engineering?
Yeah, so I think it's exactly that point, right? So finding more examples of engineering or technology or anything you do that is an intervention. It can be a political intervention, but something that we get tested in a trial, and then you see have a control group, and you have a group that you don't treat in that sense, right? And then you can look really at the difference, whether it's scientifically sound. And I think things like that, find more such examples where you can do such tests, right? So if you have Climeworks taking CO2 out of the atmosphere, can you show on a local level that there's a difference, right? If you do that, rather than just say okay, that's a good thing to do. We should do more of that.
Any other responses? There's another question right here. Someone had their hand up right here. Go ahead, and then right behind you.
Yes, so I'm getting a bit desperate, So we see the increasing evidence of things changing ever faster. On the other hand, humankind seems to be very good in distracting itself with starting other wars and wars and wars instead of working together in solving these huge issues we have. I have been working on solar energy, so I see that we have the solutions. I see the exponential growth, which gives a lot of hope, but still probably too slow to stay within the safe zone. So I'm wondering, and the other thing, I think you mentioned it, probably all of us here live wealthy enough, live secure enough so that we have the mind space to keep ourselves busy with these things. But the majority of the people on this planet do not have this possibility. They need all their headspace to stay alive day by day, keep food by day. So
what's the
how
question?
how do we go on from there, as scientists, but also as members of society?
Okay.
Yeah, I can take. I mean, you're absolutely right, and you know, we've even published quite recently and working on the whole concept on approaching the risk of a polycrisis, and the polycrisis is academically defined as when you have parallel global systemic crises occurring simultaneously and reinforcing each other. So when you have an economy and inflation, you have a war in Ukraine impacting on gas and thereby fertilizers, causing food insecurity in the Horn of Africa, plus climate change causing water scarcity and further reinforcing droughts, and then plus on top of that distrust in the governance systems. When these reinforce each other, you come closer to a risk of not only unmanageable risks in the Earth system, but also unmanageable outcomes, and you get basically a halt in our pathways towards a safe landing on, for example, the energy transition. So you're absolutely right. There's a lot of turbulence there. The question is how to handle that. And what we're exploring increasingly is to find, you know, radical alternative exponential pathways. And one of them could be, and we've actually experimented it to some in one sector, I'll give that example, which is by identifying keystone actors in different sectors. So not bother about the way we've been dealing with sustainability issues for 50 years, namely that this is something that should be done in consensus. All countries in the world should agree. Basically, our task is always to build awareness, and fundamentally, we're waiting for people to be willing to pay and willing to act sustainably. As if it's always a question of being informed and taking information and then lifting yourself up to a point that I'm now willing to sacrifice a certain step to be sustainable. We say this is the path. This is not a solution. The pathway is rather to say the global cement industry, or the global fertilizer industry, or the global energy industry, or the global fisheries industry is often just 5 to 10 companies controlling the whole global market. And this is published in several papers, the keystone actors that basically control the whole value chain, fishing all the oceans. There's only 13 companies in the world that controls like 70% of the entire value chain in the seafood industry in the world. I mean, I'm talking all the tuna, all the cod, all the halibut, all the basic fish that we eat is controlled by just a handful of companies. We published a paper on this, and then academically you're normally finished with your work. But we actually took ourselves away from that comfort zone and invited the CEOs of all these 13 companies to a meeting to start an initiative to see could we change the attitude in these big keystone actors. And that has now turned into something called the Seafood Business for Ocean Stewardship, with 10 of these 13 now being together. One of them went bankrupt, a Spanish company, an Alaskan company did not want to join, and a Chinese would not join either. But it's quite interesting. This is an effort of trying to tip the entire logic. The theory is that if you get the keystone actors to change, could that change the logic in the global market? Because you cannot get to all the millions, and you don't want to get to the small-scale fisher communities because they are struggling with their everyday life, but you have to get, or you could get to the keystone actors. We've done the same thing with the heavy truck industry. Did you know that there are only 6 companies in Europe producing trucks? Only 6. We invited all the CEOs to the Potsdam Institute. All of them came, and that led to a declaration where they said, okay, if the world needs to be off internal combustion engines by 2050, we will stop selling internal combustion engine-driven trucks 10 years before, because it takes us 10 years to design a new platform for our trucks. This is Daimler, Volvo, Scania, Ford, I'm missing one or two. Yeah. You see my point.
Yeah.
Friday evening. Anyway, so the point is these are keystone actors. And the theory is, can these tip over, this large enough minority tip over the logic in the majority? I know that this is quite unconventional. We're exploring it increasing in different sectors, but it's one way to address your question, because I totally agree. We cannot expect people who are struggling with their everyday life to suddenly be sustainable. You know, we have to make it easy for them, and we have to have the, you know, almost like go in a bit like you're doing when working with your bones. You know, you have to just simply go in like really touch the exact point, the levers of delicate change. That's why, by the way, to close this, to say that we also doing the same thing on climate. You have 4 big actors, which is the US, the European Union, China, and India. If the 4 of them, just the 4 of them, really start acting, you've solved 70% of the problem. 70%, 4 actors. You know, fundamentally, you get Modi, Xi Jinping, Ursula von der Leyen, and Biden to just agree, shut them in a room, throw out the key, don't let them out until it's done. Then you would start, and the thing is that if they would agree on a global price on carbon, for example, it would spill over on everyone. I'm of the view that the best thing that's happened the last 5 years is the European Union CBAM, the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, that the European Union is now threatening to have an import tax on carbon because the carbon price in Europe is so high that European industries is starting to feel that they cannot compete on equal grounds. That would organically start making a global price on carbon. And all science shows that that could tip the scale very rapidly. So I don't think we should give up, but I totally agree with your concern. And we don't have the answer yet, but we like to explore that in new ways of doing research in this area.
Thank you for that, Johan. Thank you for the question, and thank you for that. I think it's really interesting. If you think of healthy ecosystems, the apex predators are critical.
It's totally inspired from ecology.
I mean, this is really
keystone species
Yeah.
determine the outcome in the whole
chain.
chain.
Yeah, really
So
interesting.
that's where it comes from.
Yeah.
The keystone actor idea.
That's really intriguing, very intriguing. Go ahead.
Hello, thank you for the enriching conversation and opportunity. And Chris brought up 2 forces, the local force and the global force, and I would want to bring another forces, the policy making and the bottom-up action. How do you see these forces playing the next years, let's say? If one you see is going to be greater than other, or is going to cause more effect, and what humans' problems do you see they both have in common as blockers to get where we want to get?
So, Josephine, you've been doing with your
I mean, we do probably more the bottom-up approach with our solutions, which I think is key to just also bring some innovations in and just also do something new, right? And then raise awareness. And then we also see that some local partners are now starting to do their own things, which is great because there's so much scale to regenerate coral reefs. And at the same time, for us, it's also critical to have, as I mentioned, marine protected areas, for example. So more the policy level to protect these reefs, because if we build something and it's still overfished and polluted and not protected, it doesn't make any sense. So for us, I think it's really the interplay of both levels.
If I may add to that, I think most of the things are bottom up that we experience. There's not so much policy making. It's not the policy that makes us use gas or burn fuel, right? That would only be a stoppable thing, to stop it, right? And make laws against it. So I think most of initiatives are bottom up, and don't think about just the people that are bottom up, but also the companies and small companies and larger companies. They bottom up, and I think they're going to be much faster than politics in the end. And that's the example you said. You bring these 5 CEOs together, and then they just decide, let's do that 10 years earlier. Because that would not work in politics so easily. And there's also a larger scale. There's 126 companies that are working together, led by Swiss Re, for example, in insurance risks, right? And they are very much doing that. They have all kinds of things that they're working on their own, because it's also economical. So I think this is a very important part, the bottom up, that they shouldn't be stopped by politics. That's the important part, right? So that, of course, that you have a spirit that you can still go on. And in medicine, it's the same thing, right? So it's just you need to make sure that you don't do things that are unsafe and reducing the risk. But then you let the people develop, innovate, and there's so many more people than politicians, right? So I think you can be much more creative if you do that. So I'm a strong believer in bottom-up initiatives.
you want to comment or go to another question?
Or we can go to the next.
Okay, there's who's on that side of the room? There's a gentleman right here in the fourth row. And then we're going to go to the back. And then we're going to come over here to the gentleman who's been very patient on the right. Yes.
Hello. I have one question regarding the law of the upcoming law of the ESG and CSRD reporting in Europe. So this would be an incentive for many companies to drive forward the sustainable transformation. How optimistic does this directive make you? And where do you actually see potential maybe to make it more tangible in the European Union to actually drive forward a sustainable transformation, since the IPCC reports also didn't make politicians that much comply with them?
I can't answer the question. I have no idea what what the law is or coming. So
no, so well, I can just share with you that our assessment is that companies have many times, if not even generally, come one step further than policymaking in recognizing the need to act, particularly on climate. They are quite frustrated right now because there are so many reporting schemes, not only let's say policy-determined ones like the ESG framework in the European Union, but also voluntary schemes like, for example, the Science-Based Target Initiative and different schemes that companies really want to perform on because it gives them a little bit of a competitive edge and they can attract more really talented employees, the next generation of skills. So it's quite interesting that being kind of, let's say, active on climate reporting has become one of the measures if you want to be a successful company, and that's really positive. It's not in the entire world, but it's actually coming quite fast, both in the US and the European Union. But there's a frustration over the myriad of different reporting schemes. I'm of the view, though, that overall, even that chaos is actually quite positive. It forces companies to really report. However, the problem I see is that I encounter more and more CEOs that say, look here we have our conventional quarterly reporting to our shareholders, and this is what we do on our profits and kind of basically our bottom lines. And then we have to do the ESG reporting as well, still over here. And of course, that will never make us succeed. We have to make these entirely together to say that the sustainability reporting should be integrated with the economic reporting and should determine the economic reporting in a much more full way. So what I always try to tell CEOs that your ultimate indicator of success is when you can prove that you're earning more money thanks to your decarbonization work, that you can really show that this is a winning pathway for profits, because that will make the policymakers more reassured. Yeah, this is good politics. So, but still, we are a little bit in the old school type of measurements. We're kind of imposing these reporting schemes, and businesses don't really see the benefits yet. But it will come. I'm quite sure about that, actually. So we still have some work to do there to kind of really make this so it makes sense for the companies and the boards in the companies. But ultimately, I think it's good.
We're on the right trajectory, right?
We're on the right trajectory. Yeah, we are, actually.
There's a question right in the back. What's that? Go ahead. Do you want to say? Okay. Go ahead. Let's go ahead.
Can I ask?
Hi.
Now, we basically talk about the regeneration from scientific way, and I'm more interested in sociological perspective, because we have to make the balance between natural science and social science. So from my perspective view, I have two questions. The first question is big, and there's an important term in sociology, which means historical conjuncture. It means that the abrupt change instead of accumulation that is very slow. And could you make bold assumption or some prediction of in the last few years or 10 years, let's say, if they're about to historical change is about to happen? That's my first question.
Okay, you get one question.
Okay, so that's
There's your question. That's a good one, actually. Just because we'll pause with that one, because I think that's actually a really fascinating one. The historical conjunction. Do we feel like we're coming to a conjunction point? Right? What do you guys think? I'm going to start with Josephine.
Yeah, maybe I think, so from our point of view with coral reefs, for example, if it's likely that we see them extinct in already the next decades, right? And now it looks very bad. You can see with the bleaching events, you can see with your own eyes how it looks like. So I feel like, and that's sad, but maybe once like these kind of thresholds are passed, I feel like then hopefully there's an awakening. But you already see now more and more talk about if there are bleaching events in Australia, for example, or Florida, there's happening more. So I feel like because it's only a matter of time, since we are at these kind of tipping points now, I think there will be historic change if we want to kind of, yeah.
The social awareness is actually
awareness,
rising.
yeah.
I think that's what any other. Johan, what do you think?
Yeah, I think if you look at it at a global scale, I think the answer is no. We've not crossed a social tipping point. We're not at a kind of a social transformation, truly. But I think we're seeing more and more, pockets, regions that are really showing a clear sign of, let's say, irreversible social change towards shifting much more in terms of resource efficiency and particularly on climate transition. And you certainly see it in certain economic sectors. I mean, for example, electric mobility is definitely an industry that has totally shifted. I mean, if you look at Germany and what's happening with the car industry, it's beyond a point of no return to move away from the internal combustion engine. I mean, we're in the beginning of the end of the diesel and gasoline-driven mobility in Europe, for example. I mean, that's clear. That is, in my view, it's an engineering feat, but it's a social transition. It's a conjuncture, definitely. But I don't feel that we're not yet there when it comes to the entire world is not on board. I think it comes back to the question earlier here on the inequities in the world and how the vast majority are still struggling just to make their kind of daily life advance.
I think it's a really great question. That's why
Just ask one thing. I understood you said earlier, about 20 minutes ago, that COP28 is exactly the point if we do not move now, there's no more point of return. Didn't you say that? Did I totally misunderstand you?
No, what I said is that this COP meeting, I assess, and well, I would say that many of us in the climate science community assess that this is the last chance we have to start bending the curve on fossil fuel emissions. So it's not the end of the world, but the IPCC shows clearly that if we do not bend the global curve of emissions by 2025, we have no chance of staying within the global carbon budget that can hold the 1.5 degrees Celsius limit. So if we want to have a chance, we need to do something now, 2023, to really start bending the curve. And the challenge is that we're making huge progress on renewable energy in the world. But so far, it's only meeting growing demand. It's not changing the trajectory on oil, coal, and gas. That's the problem. We have to start really bending that. So that's what I said. COP28, in my view, must be the mitigation COP. And can you imagine, 28 climate meetings have so far not been really about mitigation, meaning phasing out fossil fuels. It's been about fighting over brackets and commas. It's been about adaptation and finance and loss and damage and all the other issues, really important issues. But we have to come to a point where we start having credible pathways to phase out oil, coal, and gas. And that's what I meant with the COP28.
Thank you for that. Now I'm going to come back to rethinking regeneration. Right, I'm going to bring it back in for a minute. I'm going to bring it back to the center of the table. I say it with a smile because it is very, very serious what we're talking about here. Because you mentioned before, this is about the regeneration of our planet and how her capacity to regenerate, to allow this to us Homo sapiens to have and all the living other beings to have a safe operating system. So I'm not making light of this. It's just I'm going to bring it back to regeneration for a moment. William Gibson says, the future is already here, just unevenly distributed. Right? And I like that because that means there are places in the world we can look to as exemplars to amplify the positive. Say, that's where we need to look. So in each of your domains, your worlds, where do you look to be inspired or to say, hey, this is something that's really interesting to share with us. That is, you say there's a direction for the future. And any of you. So who wants to go? All right, they're all looking at Johan.
Yeah,
You want Josephine? All right, you got it.
I can
Thank
go.
you.
For us, I think it's really the local communities and the NGOs we find as well.
Mm-hmm.
So to see on the ground how people already suffer from the loss of coral reefs.
Mm-hmm.
And then, we have one approach to restore, but there are, as I said, marine protected areas. There are other fisheries, like fishermen who already understand that they can't fish everything, but they fish more sustainable because they realize that it has an impact on their livelihoods as well. Then there are more fish. And I think to see these different approaches and mindsets locally and how we can combine these approaches with us. There are also great other startups, for example, who plant climate resilient corals on healthy reefs or on structures like we do. And I think that's very inspiring to see these different approaches and how to bring them together to boost the resilience of this ecosystem.
That's cool. So the locals you work with inspire you.
Yeah.
That's great. Ralph, what about you?
Yeah, I had a chance to think about it a little bit. It's actually not so,
He was being
not so
nice to
easy.
you.
That he started was really good. No, I think I find it fascinating to look sometimes also very small. These days we can go really detailed, and it used to be that we could only look at one small little thing, and then there's so many small things, many atoms, right? And you could not have a further insight. But today we have so much data available that we can store all of this information and learn from these kinds of things. And so, there was also a little bit the social part that you mentioned, that I think we had the tipping point because everybody has a social media type of approaches. Data is used positively or negatively. So we have this wealth of data that I'm fascinated by, but we have to make good use of it and not produce only fake news, right, in that sense. So I think this is something that I'm very interested. How can we use all of that data to bring messages across that will influence people? Because they look at it. Every day we're looking at it. We are consuming this data that is produced. And I find it very fascinating now how and even the world is coming together. Is not you go to a remote place, they still have the same data that they actually draw their conclusions on. And how do we make that available to the people, right, in a good way? Also scientists now, right, in a responsible way. So I'm fascinated about that thought, how we can use this information on the very local level, on an atomistic level, and maybe get information out for you that helps you understanding what happens and how we do interventions.
That's cool. Thank you for that.
Yeah, so I told a few examples on that when it comes to electric mobility and when it comes to renewable energy. So let me take another example that I find really inspiring, and I take it deliberately because it's worth mentioning that I started by sharing that 6 of the 9 planetary boundaries are outside of the safe space. And we know that the energy transition is one of the pathways to bring us back, but the most important one is actually the food system transition.
Yeah.
Because that would bring us back on freshwater use, on biodiversity loss, on pollution of marine systems from nitrogen and phosphorus overloading, the loss of biodiversity, land system change. And I think one of the most exciting developments we see among small-scale farmers, particularly in South America, but also parts of Southern Africa, is the transition away from plowing to different forms of minimum tillage systems. And this is defined as conservation agriculture. There are many scholars that today show that one of the biggest mistakes we did in the agricultural revolution was to start plowing, because plowing means we turn the soil and it burns organic carbon. It destroys a large part of the biology in the root zone layer in the soils. it leads to more erosion and land degradation, and it loses soil water holding capacity.
Yeah.
But there's so many implements today, even pulled by oxen, where you simply just open up the soil and you can plant exactly like precision farming for small-scale farmers, and you maintain soils as close as possible to nature, and you build organic carbon, you have much more productive soils. And this has led to an agricultural revolution in parts of Latin America. As we speak, actually, we never talk about this, and it's coming more and more in countries like Zimbabwe, Kenya, Burkina Faso, Niger. It's quite interesting, Zambia. So I think that's one of the promising pathways, because it's building more resilient, it's more regenerative, but it's also a carbon sequestration strategy. So, you know, there are these almost silent, large system changes occurring bottom up, they're just occurring there without us even recognizing them fully.
Well, that's a really fantastic example, Johan, with the importance of soil, or soil health, and the food that we eat and where it comes from. And that's actually the conversation we're going to be having here tomorrow evening.
Okay.
Yeah, so thank you for that transition. I do appreciate that. That's perfect.
Not planned at all.
Not at all, but I'll pay you afterward. That's great. Thank you.
Oh, good. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. So I do want to thank our panel this evening for being here and for really taking us on an amazing journey from the planet all the way down to the cell and in between. It's really been fantastic. So Johan, Josephine, and Ralph, thank you. Let's give them a nice round of applause. Thank you. And I would like to thank all of you very, very much for choosing to be here this evening on a Friday evening. Those of you here in the room and those of you online, it's been really great to have you here. Excellent, really excellent questions, extremely thoughtful group. I know Johan's got to bolt off, but we're going to be here for a few more minutes. Now, tomorrow evening, I did mention Rethinking Urban Agriculture. We'll be right here at 18:15, at 6:15, an earlier slot, with Iris Haberkorn, Marcel Graf, and Anja Steglich. We'll be talking about some of the things which you've just mentioned right there at the very end. So thank you very much, and we will see you tomorrow, I hope. All right. Awesome.
Thank you very much. Yeah.